Thanks everyone. As I said, I'm Kerry Johnston, and so I was born and bred in North Otago and still have a lot of family connections down here, many of whom are in the room tonight. So I get to kickstart the policy part of the evening, and so I'll try not to make this drag on because it can be a bit dry. So we'll see how we go. When the slides decide to work. Bring it. Right, so I get to, as I said, talk about things probably more at the national level at this point in time and leave it to our friends at the Otago Regional Council and the Waitaki District Council to address that part. But I thought I'd start with a little bit of sort of 101, which is the hierarchy of things. So from a regulation point of view, the diagram that is on the screen that sort of shows how things are interconnected. So we obviously all know about the Resource Management Act at the top of the hierarchy. That falls down to national policy statements and national environmental standards. Next layer down in the hierarchy is regional policy statements, and then we get into regional and district plans. So national policy statements, these are set by central government. So we all know about, probably a little bit more about national policy statements than we did with the release of the freshwater reform sort of later last year, which were a national policy statement. They prescribe objectives and policies for matters of national significance, and there are currently 4 in force across the country. So freshwater management, as I alluded to before, renewable electricity generation, coastal and electricity transmission, and there's one that is proposed at the moment, what is for biodiversity. So in a short, a national policy statement sets the direction of travel. That's sort of where we're all headed. So the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management, which was gazetted in September last year, it sets the national water quality outcomes. It says that meeting those outcomes may be generational, but the key thing there is that regional councils must give effect to this National Policy Statement in their plans by the 31st of December 2024. So that is not that far away. It also brings in this concept of te mana utu wai, and that essentially means that the health of the water comes first. So previously, cultural, environment, social and economic were all considered equal, whereas now the health of the water takes priority over all other needs. The interesting point to note with this is that while plans don't have to give effect to it until 2024, councils must have regard to this now when they are making decisions. We also have the National Environmental Standards, which are set by central government as well, and they prescribe technical standards as well as methods or requirements for monitoring. Now these are minimum standards. Councils can opt to put in stronger requirements than the National Environmental Standards are, and there are 6 currently in force, which I won't read out because there is a big list, but the one I'm going to talk a little bit about is obviously plantation forestry. So my big red statement there at the top, it does not apply to carbon forestry. So basically it also does not address the potential effects of the locations of new forests, so that's as such as reduced water yield, so that's on wetlands, rivers and streams, or clearance of native vegetation. It only covers the effects associated with planting, pruning and thinning to waste, earthworks, river crossings, harvesting and mechanical land preparation and replanting. So there are some really big holes in that National Environmental Standard. The next layer down, as I said, was the regional policy statements. So they are set by the regional councils and they must give effect to any national policy statements. So they also are the place where they sort of state what the significant resource management issues are for the region, objectives sought to be achieved and the environmental results anticipated. So where the national policy statement sets the national direction of travel, the regional policy statements do the same thing, but at that regional level. So if we think about our hierarchy, we're just going all the way down, giving effect to everything. So regional and district plans must give effect to any national policy statement and regional policy statements. So we have the Otago Regional Policy Statement, the Otago Regional Plan, and obviously the Waitaki District Plan in play at the moment. None of these address carbon forestry or any matters beyond the national environmental standards for plantation forestry. So there are some holes really in your local planning level that don't address the issues that we're talking about today. Locally, ECAN and Waimarie District Council are currently the only regional and district authorities to have addressed this, and they have now put in rules into their plans relating to the use of land for forestry, including carbon forestry. So my statement there, and I'm sort of following on from some of the figures in Karen's presentation, was there is New Zealand research that suggests that the impacts on annual water yield in catchments from forestry is between 15 and 80%, and in catchments with an already low water yield, this is a potentially catastrophic impact. So under the national environmental standards we have for freshwater at the moment, most land use changes are required to go through a robust assessment process. And the question I'm asking here tonight is, should conversion of land to forestry also be the same, and what regulatory tools are available? The time to have these conversations is now, because obviously we've got regional and district councils needing to review their plans by the 31st of December 2024, so we've got out in. Thank you.
Peter, there. Do you guys need a PowerPoint? Is that a bit better? Yep. Yeah, much better.
The previous speaker is up. Oh, sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. The runner? Yep, thank you. The previous speaker has done a great job, and I'm going to have to skip through a few slides because some of the material I've brought to you is already been covered. With me tonight is Gwyneth Elson from the council, and also Tapua Marapara, scientist, who might help with some questions later on. Just going to the next slide, I'll just work the technology. We're good. I think this has been pretty well covered. This is the overview context, so I'm not going to labour on the point, and we'll move to the next point. And again, it's also been covered. Thank you very much.
No worries.
Just looking at those points in a bit of detail, I think I've gone back. Bear with me. It's jumping ahead of me. Thank you.
Yeah.
As indicated, I think a key point in this is that the NES for plantation forestry really only applies where there's commercial purposes and harvesting, and that's where the carbon farming doesn't kick in. Going on to, again, if I get the technology right, it's not working for me. I think I'll rely on you for me. What we have in ORC is a partially operative, regional policy statement. There's my dyslexia coming in. It's principally an effects-based policy. So it's not about targeting an industry, it's about the effects of activities. ORC does not currently have a land use controls in the regional plan that enable us to manage the forestry, as pointed out previously, or impose conditions on carbon farming through consents. There is, in the current partially operative regional policy statement, some direction in terms of locations, and one provides for the fact that there needs to be management of land in dry catchments. One of the things to remember though is regulatory requirements can be investigated and enforced by IC where regulatory requirements are not met, i.e. the effects are not met through the compliance process. Going on to the next one. As was indicated, there's an important development that is occurring at the moment, and that is the Land and Water Regional Plan development process. That's going to provide an opportunity for future arrangements, management and control of land uses. And as part of that development, OIC will be considering alongside with communities the suitability of land use such as the catchment we're looking at. Might go to the next one. The other development that's occurring in tandem, and I might just refer back to the previous one, these are both in parallel and will sync together, and that is the new Regional Policy Statement 2021. That policy is scheduled for a notification by June 2021. That's subject to council consideration, of course, and this will subsequently lead to a public consultation process or comment on the draft RPS. The new RPS is seeking to build on and improve the directions in both the regional and district plans we have to respond to reasonably significant issues, as was indicated earlier, and in particular in a more integrated manner. So I appreciate the previous speakers covering so much good material for me. That's the end of my part of the talk. Gary.
Good evening, everyone, and great to see such a good turnout and such passion for such a very special place in the Waitaki district. Just want to acknowledge we've got a number of councillors here tonight, Deputy Mayor Tavendale, Councillor King and Councillor Hopkins, maybe one or two others. Anyway, we are here to give as much information as we possibly can and to hear what you've got to say. It's been good to hear from ORC because it's a bit of information that we needed, I needed. But the reality is, as I said just before, we do have a very special place and we do want to protect it. But, and there's a big but, there's a lot of work has been done in the whole catchment. We know that, and we've actually been part of it. We've helped fund it. We've supported it in different ways. Sorry, I'm trying to read my writing here. We've had a visit to Hazeldean and had a bit of a look around there, and just looking at the regeneration of the native vegetation, it's been very impressive. The work that's been done on possum eradication is fantastic, and it has made it the place that is definitely worth saving and making sure that we do what we can. From my perspective and from Council's perspective, it's been about raising awareness in the public, spreading the message about what is happening so that people know that it's happening in the Waitaki district. We've seen it happening in the North Island. Didn't think it was going to be too much of a problem here. I didn't even know that Fairview was a carbon forest, to be fair, until after the fire. So, that's been a bit of an awakening. And, I'm sorry that there was that lack of awareness on that. We are doing what we can to lobby Wellington, trying to get meetings with David Parker, Ayesha Verrill as Acting Minister of Conservation, with James Shaw as Minister of Climate Change. Not having a lot of luck, but we will keep trying. As far as New Zealand carbon forests go, well, quite frankly, I mean, I don't trust them. They haven't been honest. They went and applied for a resource consent with Fairview. They didn't like the conditions. They didn't come back to the council. They just went ahead and planted it out. At the time, we didn't know, and it was later on that we became aware of it. Unfortunately, at that time, we didn't act because I think it was, I don't know all of the reasons behind that, but that is something that I think we should apologise to the community for, because it's not something that we realised had happened at the time, and then when we did, we didn't act. More recently, we have been dealing with New Zealand Carbon Forests again with around Hazeldean. They've been talking to our team. They've been looking at what the implications are as to what triggers a resource consent. What they've put to us, the plan that they've put to council, to the planning team, is one that doesn't require a resource consent. They skirt around the edges and make sure that they don't trigger the resource consent. Having said that, as part of their plan, there is almost 1,000 hectares which they say they're not going to plant out. They're not allowed to clear it because that would breach, that will absolutely set off the trigger for needing a resource consent. The earthworks that they've already carried out on Hazeldean, to be fair, when I had a wee look at up there, looks like it's maybe a wee bit more than what they were allowed to do without a resource consent, but our team is looking at that and they need to make a call on that one. So we are doing what we can to make sure that they stay within the rules and that they don't go and plant in areas and destroy some of the habitat. Having said that, we know there's going to be issues with what they do anyway. The things around the hydrology and just the effects of having pine plantation in that sort of size. Issues around fire and pests, the social issues. We know and understand all of those things, and we would do something if we possibly could, and if they give us any reason to be able to do something, I can assure you we will. What else we got here?
Gary, haven't you got a reason as the fact of what they've done in the last block?
Basically, it's like a statute of limitations. What they did in the last block.
Don't give me the rules and regulations.
Oh, sorry, you just asked for the rules and regulations.
How long have you been in council for?
I've been there for, well, apart from one term, I've been there for 20 years.
And you stood up there before and said you didn't know it was a carbon farm,
Yep.
and yet they applied for consent.
I don't see what elected members don't see all the consent applications. So if you want to have a go, if you want to ask questions, at least have the decency to listen to the answer.
We'll deal with all the questions shortly. We'll just let Gary finish and then we'll get into the questions and we'll bring the whole panel back up.
So where we're at the moment is we are seeking further legal advice. We've, as elected members, we've said that we want to push ahead with a plan change. We're looking at what a plan change would mean, what the rules are that we could put in place, whilst it's still at the same time making sure we're taking note of the national and regional directives that we have to follow in our district plan. So those are the things we're doing. Farmers, if we do put things into place, it may mean for farmers that there are going to be more restrictions for your other farming activities, because it's a consequence of what we may be able to put in place. We're waiting to find out more. The other problem is we were told it may cost $100,000 to do a plan change. We said that's fine, get on with it. Now we're waiting to hear, because basically we're looking to find out what things we can put in place that won't be challenged, because it's we're pretty confident that if we put anything in there that's even remotely challengeable, the carbon forestry industry, the general forestry industry, possibly even government departments will lawyer up and will take us to the Environment Court, and then we'll start talking about millions of dollars. It's a big problem. We want to deal with it, but it's trying to find the way through and that we can get a solution. fundamentally at the core of this, it's the central government that needs to change some of their attitudes to what's happening and not sacrifice rural economies and rural environments for the national environment. So, thank you.
That's all our speakers that we've got time for and have allocated. What we'll do now is I'll ask all the speakers just to come to the front, and we'll have some questions from the floor. Again, please keep the questions to topic about the issue we're trying to address, and try and keep them brief. Preferably no statements, just questions for the audience, for the panel, please. Anyone?
First, good news. It's not a big deal, but there are one of the speakers, the woman in black. Will you remind me your name?
Kerry.
I'm Bruce Comfort, Kerry.
Hi, Bruce. Yeah.
As of 2 o'clock yesterday, the stone sheep yards on Hazeldean Station have been registered as an archaeological site under the Historic Places Act. They are now given as much protection as any legislation in New Zealand can achieve. It's a minor issue, but that's something that I've organised to happen.
Thank you very much for that. I think that'll go a long way.
Yeah, Peter Grant. According to the district rules, at the moment, farming is a permitted activity, forestry is a permitted activity, and I think everyone here wants to, we realise there's issues nationally, but we want to get to the nuts and bolts, how to tackle this now. Can we make forestry, and I won't make any friends by saying this, farming a consentable activity?
That's basically the information that we're seeking at the moment to see what we can do around that. The intention is that we will get that information. We're looking to have another public meeting closer to the end of May, so we'll be able to tell you a lot more at that stage.
Yeah, I just had a question for a follow-on from that one to ORC. How do we enforce the dry catchment side of things at a district level?
At the moment, basically it'll be on the basis if, as I said, it's an effects-based process. If there's issues that emerge, then basically the ORC need to be approached to address them. It's the responsibility of the proponent to deal with it on a proactive basis and not adversely affect that and contravene that policy.
So that would be district council or the landowner?
It's actually, I believe it's both.
I've got a question for the regional councilman. I shot this with a drone with permission to be on the land at 4 o'clock today. That looks slightly more than minor earthworks that they're doing.
Yeah, no, that's...
None of that was here when we did that helicopter footage 6 weeks ago.
Yeah. You're right.
No, but I'm just
Yep, no, thank you.
saying, so you guys on the ground might not have seen that. Yeah, so.
No, well, like I said, when we were there, it looked like there was slightly more than just minor earthworks to clean up the roads.
Murray Smith, sorry I can't stand up, but Otago Regional Council, when Fairview was land sprayed originally, the runoff that went into the waterways, all the spray they sprayed, came through my property and killed everything on my side of the fence. I rang the Regional Council. I was never offered an apology or anything from New Zealand Carbon Farming. I know the helicopter pilot was fined. The other day, the helicopters went over there and sprayed those same waterways again. Blanket sprayed them from above. It's all dying. What can the Regional Council do to stop that happening on Fairview and on Hazeldean?
In this situation, obviously I can't comment on the circumstances. If, as you say, if those things have occurred, are occurring now, I'd suggest you get in contact with council and bring it to the council's attention in order for them to address what needs to be addressed. Going back to the Fairview case, I'm really not in a position to comment as it's really just not across the detail.
I did bring Otago Regional Council on the 21st of the month when that occurred, and I have not got a reply. And there was photos taken of the helicopter flying as well by the enforcement officer in the Waitaki District Council. Just happened to be at my place that day, so the Otago Regional Council do know about it.
There's someone over here.
Hamish Smith. Sort of reading between the lines, I think these guys are probably going to be able to plant their trees on the tops and not in the gullies and not in the wetlands. And then they don't trigger this resource consent need. But the ORC, you have to control the effect of your activities. And the obvious effect is these pine trees are going to spread into the gullies. So who's going to police and more importantly enforce the keeping the bloody pine trees out of these gullies, which we all accept as special?
In the first instance, the operator is required to control the activities. In the second instance,
But this is a forest and sort of perpetuity of perfect work.
Yep.
It's going to be in 200 years' time. Who's going to pay for all the enforcement and the monitoring and the policing?
so I suppose the point here is we've got the immediate situation. Going into the future, it will be based on the requirements of the policies of respective council and district council at the time. So to answer that longer term thing, that will be the case. As I indicated previously, the land and water plan is an opportunity to contribute to the future arrangements for these activities through community consultation, and that's a process that needs to be notified by the end of 2023, taking into account that the things are meant to be in place the following year. In terms of what's going on now, if there are things that are considered not that are adversely affecting, like they're basically not following the requirements, then they need to be notified to council.
Just from our perspective, one of the benefits of carbon farming was in the forestry NESs apparently that we would be able to charge for monitoring. When there's not a resource consent, we can't charge for monitoring, so that has to come out of general rates and so on. So it's not that it can't be done, but it's just not sheeting home the cost to those who are causing the monitoring to have to be done. It's one of those slight issues that we have to deal with, but it's not. From past experience, it's going to be very much a case, particularly on that early time of planting and so forth, making sure they do follow all of the rules. But yeah, as you say, that spread is going to be a major issue. They've just been cleaning up wilding spread, not just in that area, but in a whole lot of areas, and spending millions of dollars doing it.
Can I just add a little bit more to your question in the back about those gullies? And there was a comment made before about the fact that obviously they're scooting around resource consent at the moment. The resource consent requirements in the district plan are to do with the physical clearance of vegetation. There's nothing to stop them spraying those gullies and killing off that vegetation and planting it later.
I suppose I've just got a quick one for the ORC. Can we make sure that that gets written into the new policy statement, that we need something about vegetation clearance at that level for native vegetation?
So, to answer the question, at the regional level, as I indicated, it's not a case of this writing it into the process now. There's going to be a process for that to be taken into account, and people will need to engage with that process, which will be quite detailed over the next well, the next 3 years, but in particular the next 18 months. And I would encourage everybody who has a view to participate in that process.
I'd like to ask Karen Mayhew, the dock lady, what your dock department's going to do in this Hazeldean case about preserving these rare native fish from pine tree infestation over 200 years.
So, yeah, I had a chat to I'm a ranger that does a lot of groundwork. I don't have much to do with sort of policy and legislative frameworks, but I understand that DOC has very limited legislative leveraging in a situation like this. So on private land, it's just the way it is. For example, the marginal strip, the only bit of public conservation land that is on Hazeldean, on the land parcel when I was looking at the maps was Hannon Farms. But it's, so obviously, is that the same farm? That's the same? Yeah, so there's a fixed marginal strip that doesn't even follow the river course. And the stone pens, half of the circular stone pen is within that marginal strip. So the department doesn't really have any legislative framework to place as a lens on this or to kind of respond to. It's happening on private land, and it's supposed to be regulated under, district and regional plans. So it's not so much a departmental. We can't really influence it much.
So over 200 years, what distance would you need of pine trees to be from that stream to protect them?
It really varies, I think, in the size of the river. A setback. I think that there's been studies to show that a 20-meter setback of pine trees from a river that's of a moderate size like that can offer a pretty protective kind of riparian buffer. But it's very dependent upon the topography, the size of the river, the kind of flow regime.
I think the big issue we've got here is the fact that New Zealand Carbon Forestry don't have to get a consent. If they had to get a consent and it was a notified consent, we could all wade in. DOC will wade in, everybody would come in with their points of view on submissions. The fact that they're skirting around this consenting process is what is really constraining our next steps. Any questions?
Can I just add to that? You talk about the strip that DOC can actively manage. That place leading into that river is extremely steep. The tree up the top won't be 50 metres away from the river because the fall is like bluffs. So therefore, surely the DOC or the Forest and Bird or some of you fellas have got to do some clout to get them to keep them well back from any potential. There's got to be a way.
Yes,
I believe they've given a planting plan to our council, and there are some significant distances from the river, but I haven't seen it, so I can't comment more than that. Other than I don't know whether vertical distance is counted as horizontal distance or whether it's got to be horizontal distance. To be fair, again, it's looking at what are they following the rules, and if they're following the rules, there's just not a lot we can do. It comes back to getting central government to recognise that these environments are special. We've heard about the rare fish and so on that are in there in the stream. They're special, and we spend a lot of money every year looking after birds and various things, making sure that they stay protected, like bloody red-billed gulls. The least we can do is have a government that actually looks after these environments as well.
I was just going to ask Gary, just on those consent wording, Gary, for the district plan, were you going to try to make that notifiable? Because it's quite a difference, isn't it, between a standard consent and a notifiable consent, do you think?
Well, that's part of the advice we need to get, is you know, are we able to make it a notifiable consent? Is it going to be discretionary or controlled or whatever? And I see Roger Cook, our regulatory manager, wanting to say some words, because he knows more about this stuff than I do.
Well, I'm not sure on that, Gary. You're doing a good job. Good evening, everybody, and it's great to see so many people here. And I think there's no doubt about it. It's a fantastic environment, and I manage the regulatory team in council, so I look after building, planning, and environment. And I notice there's a stick here, and I guess that's to beat me up with. Is that right, Murray?
If we don't get what we want.
I think the one thing that everybody will have picked up today is that it is hugely complex. We've got many views represented here, which is why we have to progress very carefully. And as Gary said, we could do a district plan change, and my team have estimated we could probably do that for about 100,000,
It'll be peanuts.
which council have said yes, you can go ahead and do that. But we face a huge legislative challenge on some areas, so we're seeking specialist advice in this area from some of the best brains in the country to make sure when we move correctly, and we move in a direction that's going to give the answers and the solutions that you want.
Waimaki's done it. What does the Waimaki district plan say? I mean, just cut and paste out of the Waimaki district plan. Why do you need specialists? Waimaki District Council have got provisions, apparently, in their district plan to control forestry plantation and carbon farming. How hard is it? Cut and paste.
The advice is that they're not robust enough for what we need.
But it's put the kibosh on some forests over there.
Yeah,
It must be pretty good.
Has it? Has it worked?
The reality is, it's an example we need to look at. Is it going to do something at least?
Yeah.
Is it going to solve all the problems? We don't know. So definitely worth looking at.
I mean, these guys who own New Zealand carbon farming are some of the richest blokes in New Zealand, with some of the largest landholdings in New Zealand, and now New Zealand carbon farming. You won't be able to piss around with these guys. How do you think they're going to feed? How do you think they're going to react when you go and say, oh, your roads are a bit wide and you push the gravel into the gullies? These guys have got more horsepower than you can imagine, Gary.
Bruce.
I'm not sure if you're trying to make an argument for us just to give up now, or actually keep fighting.
No.
I'm struggling, Bruce.
No.
But we'll go to the other Bruce.
Thank you, Gary. That's a good interpretation of what I said.
If the analysis and the evidence suggests that they have, or proves that they have done unconsented earthworks, then as a council we are prepared to take action. We have cases going through the judicial system at the moment where landowners have cut unconsented tracks. So we're not very afraid to take action where necessary, but we do have to have follow a proper process to take people to court.
Bruce Burnett.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand that council, under its present district plan, has oversight over Indigenous vegetation clearance, and has some rules around that. Now, under that plan, have you got the regulatory ability to ban the blanket spraying of toxic chemical as part of the pine preparation process, planting process? That in effect wipes out the Indigenous vegetation.
The answer is no, they don't, and that was what I was alluding to before, is that the rules only control the physical earthworks activities associated with the clearance of vegetation. They could go and blanket spray it and plant it anyway.
But the regional council does control that.
Do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, it highlights a big hole in the district plan. I mean, the other point I think it's important that's coming up is the NPS Indigenous Biodiversity, which we'll hopefully see soon. And once that's out there, then the councils have to have regard for it. And what we're hoping to see in that is much greater protections for looking after Indigenous biodiversity, and then that sits on top of the kind of district plans, etc. The other point that I'll just make is both the regional council's got its long-term plan out at the moment, and I think you guys are about to, or have, it's out.
District plan or
long-term plan,
yeah, long-term.
And so that decides where our rates get spent, and if we want to see more monitoring, compliance and enforcement to make sure that people are following the rules and the council has the ability to make these plan changes, I would encourage people to submit to those and do that. I know the regional council is proposing a big ramp up in some of those areas, which is good to see. So,
and to be fair, we've ramped ours up as well.
Yeah.
We've got compliance, a couple of compliance officers now, but yeah, trying to monitor a whole lot of things where there's no consent. You don't necessarily know things are happening, and you're watching to make sure nothing happens. It actually requires all of us to you know, if you're seeing something that you know shouldn't be happening, or you think shouldn't be, you need to let us know so that we can at least follow it up, and that's what we do need to do.
So what does the council personally know about New Zealand carbon forests? I mean, and what homework have you done on them, and where they've been and operated? I mean, they're now the 5th largest landowner in New Zealand. They've certainly exposed different regions in the country, and they've hit headwaters, and now they've found this easier picking.
Exposed or exploited?
Both.
Yeah. What do you know about it? Probably more.
We have consulted with other districts. There's a mechanism within council where we can send out a message to our peers, and we've had some responses back. Generally, somewhat a bit ho-hum with them. They've got carbon farming forests in their districts, and they haven't had any issues, which is somewhat surprising. And I know we've had the issue with Fairview, but I have my team's engagement with New Zealand Carbon Farming, and I know they've got quite a lot to gain out of this process. They've been very cooperative in answering questions when we've had questions. They've been very cooperative in allowing us on site. Today they've given permission for us to put our own ecologist in through Hazeldene. So we've got their ecology report in connection with their certificate of compliance application, which has been provided by a reputable ecologist, but we have commissioned a separate ecological review of the area. They've readily accepted their presence. They've readily accepted us investigation into their track carvings. So at the moment, that they're being very cooperative with us, and I'm not saying that necessarily gives them, any more rights to do what they're doing, but at least they are talking with us, communicating with us, and providing the information when asked.
Well, I understand that it's a policy question. You said that the carbon farming doesn't have to comply with the environmental and the water quality regulations, and it seemed to me that all these issues would go away if they did have to comply on a national level. Then all the regional council didn't have to worry about that, because obviously this is not going to comply with the environmental and water quality regulations. So why is it that they don't have to comply? Well, for the policy question, you brought it up.
At the moment, the National Environmental Standard only relates to commercial forest activities. It doesn't extend to non-commercial, so carbon farming obviously sits under that umbrella. But I heard these guys say before they are lobbying central government to do that. However, there's nothing to stop regional and district councils doing it in the meantime if they see the need within their regions to do so. So yes, the national option is one, but doesn't mean if it's not done at that level you can't do it. It just drops it down to that next level to address it.
But why did it come into place in the first place? Why, after the rule came into existence?
The rule that came into existence was to do with like I said, plantation forest, not carbon. It was excluded. Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Why?
Why? I don't know the answer to that. I wish I did. Perhaps a little bit of little bit of hindsight. The guy who worked for the government at the time might be able to tell us.
Is it something to do with the MPI creating the NES rather than the Ministry of the Environment?
We've got time for a couple more questions down here.
So, with carbon farming, is that not commercial farming? Are they not doing it commercially?
Well, yeah, they're getting money from it, but it's where the trees are actually harvested, and it's specifically excluded within the National Environmental Standard that exists at the moment.
One more. Yep.
Yeah, Malcolm here. What is the proposed district plan on forestry? The definition of a forest, is it an acre or more, or 2 acres, or whatever? And the other issue here is, I didn't realise that they're going to have these trees planted for 200 years. Well, the council's quite welcome to come out and look at what happens when you've got a plantation next door here that was, we've been beside it for 20 years. It was there for probably 20 plus years when we went there. The trees are decaying. They haven't been managed properly for at least 20 years. So I can't see how these pines are going to stand up for 200 years. Already, you hear a crack and you're looking around, hoping that it's not coming your direction. So, but what I really wanted to know is, I put a submission in, I've heard nothing back from it whatsoever about forestry, what would be the definition of forestry, and concerns about fire breaks, etc., which flows onto this commercial forestry. So, is there anything in the pipeline, any idea, what is a forestry?
Roger's just quickly reading through to see if he can tell you that one. We don't have a planning person here who would be able to answer it directly.
The definition of forestry activity within the district plan means the use of land primarily for the purpose of planting, tending, managing, harvesting of trees for timber, but excluding amenity tree planting, woodlots and shelter belts. Where in terms of the level and the altitude at which they can be planted, that refers to the layers, within what we call layers within the district plan, and I don't have those with me, I'm afraid.
Can I ask one question? Sure. Just with it seems like, I'm just curious, is the government obliged to review the NES for plantation forestry at a certain time, and then therefore incorporate carbon credits forestry?
It is being done now, but it's still, how far it goes is still yet to be seen. Yeah.
Yes, for those that didn't hear it, the NES is currently under review. I think it's approximately 12 months behind schedule. Unfortunately, and like so many things in New Zealand at the moment, it was delayed due to COVID-19. That's what they're saying. One of the people that is working on our sort of advice, our legal advice, was actually part of the NES drafting team. And she has a huge amount of experience in managing forestry. She's well connected within government departments as well. And so I have a high level of confidence that her and her team will give us good sound advice, and at the same time be able to take back the views from Waitaki District Council into central government departments and to feed into that review.
And in the event that central government still fails to deliver on what it is that we expect, like I said, that's not the end of it. Your regional councils and district councils can still put policies and rules in place that address this, and we have seen that in Ekan and in Waimeri District. So, as I said, national is one point, but it's also down at these next layers. Yeah.
And indeed, that's what we're working on. But there's a process which it has to go through, and there's requirements under the Resource Management Act that create the framework with which that can be undertaken. Which is why we are looking at a district plan change. And whether we can get that through and what timeframes we can get that through, or whether we incorporate it in the full district plan review, which we're currently doing, which is due to go out for public consultation around late September, early October.
And you need a strong regional policy statement too from the Otago Regional Council to help deliver on it.
This is going to be a difficult one to sum up. No, that's all the time we've got for, sorry. Just one quick one here.
Kia ora, David Higgins from the Runa Koira. Kia ora everybody.
In 1848, my great-great-grandfather was the chief at Kakanui. So that's how important the river is to me. The reserve down at the estuary was my great-great-grandfather's alone, no one else. He swapped that land for an extra block at the native reserve in Moiraki, and we forgave that estuary and it was returned to the Crown. Seems to me that there is an issue of timing here. If Gary and the team are trying to encourage national government to do something about this issue, it's going to be a time issue. These guys are completely stripping that land up there at the present time, and they're going to continue doing that whilst we're trying to change the plans. Now I'm going to make a suggestion to all of you. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, get a shovel and go out into your properties and dig a hole. If you can find one of my ancestors, we know them. All joking aside, our Runaka and Gary, our tribe, are really concerned about this issue. As you know, most of you know, we are the largest landowners in the South Island after the Crown. Of our 200,000 hectares of land that we currently hold, 54,000 hectares is in forest. Some of it is native, indigenous forest, some of it is pine. There is a huge amount of carbon forest as well. I think all of you will be aware of the situation down at Dumback and down the back of Waikawaiti, where we've purchased land there that is not affected by water or rivers, but we've planted all that area out for carbon forestry. So I'm here with two hats tonight, but I suggest, Gary, you talk to our team of at least Ngāi Tahu farming, if not from our politicians in Christchurch, because if you want clout, that's where you get it from. Kia ora.
Thank you very much. When you do these meetings, you're supposed to frame up everything at the end of it and walk away with some pretty decisive conclusions about our next steps. I think our next steps are pressure. It really we need to keep maintaining pressure on our regional and district councils. We need to keep a really good eye on New Zealand carbon forestry. And if there is just an inkling of them having to get a consent, we are all interested parties. We all want to be able to submit on that consent, and would hate to think that it slips under the radar as a non-notified or something slippery like that. Thank you very much to all the speakers tonight. We appreciate it's your evenings, and thank you so much for coming along. To all our guests, thank you for sitting in the audience and your feedback. I think the key thing is don't let this issue die. It's going to be one that carries on for a long time from a regulation side of things, and we can't let it just slowly creep into our catchment. So we need to keep the pressure down. Thank you very much.